When you look at how dysfunctional, how malformed the current Republican Party is, with Donald Trump as the nominee for the third consecutive election at 78 years old and degrading before our eyes, you may wonder, like I do, like we all do, I think, how we got here. And I think the answer is kind of staring us in the face. The way America's elections and political institutions are structured provides a massive advantage for Republicans. So the United States Senate, of course, which is not a representative body, tilts massively towards Republicans the way that the current parties are sorted. The roughly 580,000 Americans who live in Wyoming, for instance, are represented by exactly the same number of senators as the 39 million people who live in California. And of course, the Electoral College functions in a similar fashion, right? It actually builds off the Senate itself. Even as it appears that Kamala Harris is right now, I would say, a pretty clear favorite to win the popular vote, probably by a margin of 1 million votes at bare minimum. The actual presidential race in terms of the electoral count is extremely close. Harris holds a narrow 1-point lead in the polling average of Pennsylvania, which we see as the tipping point state. And the election's a toss-up, right? So when you have these two structural advantages, and they're enormous, right? One house of Congress, the Senate, and the Electoral College, which elects the president, plus an extremely polarized electorate, you wind up with what I like to call the kind of trust fund Republican Party. It's like rich kids living off their parents' largesse who never have to actually like get off their duff and work for a living, right? Republicans don't need to get off the couch and do the hard work of persuading voters to get to 50+1. Because the Constitution is effectively subsidizing their lifestyle of trolling and golfing and long risks about sharks and electrocution. And that's how you wind up with Donald Trump at the top of the ticket. Again, the Republicans are the clear favorite to win the Senate, despite fielding some truly awful candidates. And the Republican Party can run terrible candidates, and it can lose the popular vote by 3 million, as Donald Trump did in 2016, which is not a small amount. It's like over a percentage point, and still stumble backwards into power. And if there is any silver lining here at all, it is that this massive dysfunction really has cost Republicans some otherwise very winnable down-ballot races in cycle after cycle after cycle, which do not have the benefit of the Electoral College, right? A statewide race and a Senate race, for instance. So the Arizona Republican Party, for example, has effectively collapsed at the statewide level over the past half decade, like improbably, in large part due to candidate quality issues. Kari Lake, who lost the gubernatorial race there 2 years ago, refuses to concede that she is not currently the governor, which she is very much not, seems hell-bent to continue that trend as she runs for the Senate this November. North Carolina's upcoming governor's race is much less competitive than you might expect, thanks to this man, Mark Robinson. He's already been elected statewide, by the way. We've covered him before on the show. He is the current Republican lieutenant governor of the state of North Carolina. He might just be the worst nominee his party has put forth for major office in recent memory, and that is really saying something.
In 2018, Robinson posted that this foolishness about Hitler disarming millions of Jews and then marching them off to concentration camps is a bunch of hogwash. He also said the movie Black Panther was, quote, created by an agnostic Jew to pull the shekels out of your Sforza pockets, using the Yiddish words for money and black.
Everybody knows that abortion in this country is not about protecting the lives of mothers. It's about killing a child because you aren't responsible enough to keep your skirt down or your pants up.
There's no reason anybody anywhere in America should be telling any child about transgenderism, homosexuality, any of that filth. And yes, I called it filth.
So that guy, the guy who's talking about pulling the shekels out of your pocket, that guy, he is currently one of 2 men who will run the state of North Carolina. There's only 2 people on the ballot, right? Major parties. His whole backstory is that he found Jesus in the 1980s and slowly but surely reformed his sinful ways. He's now an agent of sort of avowedly Christian nationalist movement working to create a kind of right-wing theocracy in America. This week, we did get a little more insight into his past. According to a new report from the Assembly in North Carolina, which has not been confirmed by NBC News, 6 men, yes, 6 men, there are 6 sources to this piece, say Robinson was a regular customer at multiple adult video stores, often paying to view or purchase pornography as frequently as 5 nights a week. It's practically a job. Now, Robinson's campaign denies these allegations strenuously. A spokesman called the allegations a word we cannot repeat. He called the journalists reporting the story degenerates. But again, multiple named sources on the record, men who either worked at or frequented those stores, including the owner, tell a different story. One guy named Dan Livingston, who again went on the record with his actual name, told the Assembly he used to see Robinson frequent a shop called The Grove. I quote here, Livingston said Robinson usually came in with a pizza, purchased a preview of an adult film, and went into a private booth to watch it and eat. Now, hey, it's a free country, okay? We should know it, of course. Consenting adults have the right to purchase some pizza and then go and produce or purchase that kind of material, pornography, at least for now. Although I should say, Donald Trump's friends at Project 2025 actually want to change that. Quoting again, pornography should be outlawed. The people who produce and distribute it should be imprisoned. Now, I don't think it's super likely that Mark Robinson, who again, in this article with 6 sources, including a named source, said that he would go frequent this shop 5 nights a week, often with pizza, that he will win his election. But this is an example, again, of the Republican instinct to nominate these kinds of guys, the most extreme antisocial candidates. And they have to be defeated at the ballot box over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, because the only way it will disappear, they keep trying it. As Jonathan Martin put it in Politico this week, if Republicans want to win, they need Trump to lose big. Trump will never concede defeat, no matter how thorough his loss. Yet the more decisively Vice President Kamala Harris wins the popular vote and Electoral College, the less political oxygen he'll have to reprise his 2020 antics. And importantly, the faster Republicans can begin building a post-Trump party. Again, of course, that outcome is far from given, right? Think of it this way. Donald Trump could utterly disappear from public, never appear in public once again from now until Election Day, still have a pretty good shot winning the White House and Republicans flipping the Senate, like a coin flip maybe. And that makes it all the more important that, again, the country's pro-democracy coalition does the hard work of preventing that outcome. Because the reality is winning a clear majority is not enough. Listen to this. The Republican Party of the United States, one of 2 major parties, the party has won the popular vote 1 time since the fall of the Berlin Wall. I'll say it again. Only 1 time since the collapse of the Iron Curtain have Republicans managed a national majority in a presidential election. So it is incumbent on Democrats to win by such a large margin that it overcomes the structural advantages against them. Even some Republicans know this is the case, like former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who spoke earlier today in Mark Robinson's home turf of North Carolina.
As a conservative, as someone who believes in and cares about the Constitution, I have thought deeply about this. And because of the danger that Donald Trump poses, not only am I not voting for Donald Trump, but I will be voting for Kamala Harris.
The MAGA movement needs to lose over and over and over again. Democracy will not be on secure footing in this country until the Republican Party internalizes the lesson that nominating extreme, dangerous, maladjusted psychopaths and hoping the quirks of our election bail you out is not enough.